Ah, super, super. Good evening, good evening. Can you hear me well? Fantastic. Just to call your attention that we have the cutout out here. If you want to take the selfie, you can do it after the conference. We're going to bring it upwards to the cocktail area, so make sure you take a nice selfie. So good evening. Thank you for coming. How was the summer? All right. Too short? I know. Well, it's very glad to see you all here. Thank you very much for being here. I feel especially honored because there's like 25 degrees outside and sunshine for late September. This is amazing. So if you are in here, I can only thank you from my heart. Thank you very much. It's great to see you all. Thank you. So let me just quickly ask, because we have a lot of new names, who is here for the first time? If you can raise your hand. Oh, okay, a big crowd for the first time here. Thank you very much. I hope you like the talk, and you will discover that it's intended to be an interactive talk, but I'll touch on that in a second. So let me just get started with the presentation. So the topic is Mayan wisdom, discovering the finest ancient civilization of the Americas. And I hope that you find this intriguing and inspiring. We will be, of course, let me start, as always, by thanking the Banque de Luxembourg, especially Pierre Alborn, Manon Feider, Aurelia Zancanello, and the whole team of events, who very generously give us this place. They have been supporting us for all of last year and all of this year. Next year, we will need to look for a new house, but in any case, we thank them for their generosity because, as you can imagine, the cost and the effort to organize this, plus the cocktail, is not insignificant. So we thank the bank very, very much. And especially, I want to thank, as always, Hisham Tuami back there in the operations cabin, who makes possible all the technology. Thank you very much. I just wish Hisham could be cloned and I could send him to the different places where I give conferences, so that it's like you just arrive to the place and you're treated like a prince. Everything works, everything functions perfectly. So thank you, Hisham, once again. So let me also tell you, so for those of you who join us for the first time, let me just show you what we've been doing for the last 2 years. So this was the program last year. We had 7 conferences. We started with Descartes, we had Sorolla, Piero della Francesca, we had Coco Chanel, we had Franz Kafka, Greek wisdom, and we closed the year with William Shakespeare, the Bard of Avon. This year, we started in January talking about love with the talk, All You Need Is 10 Cherries. In March, we talked about Frida Kahlo. We had pop art, so Andy Warhol, Liechtenstein, and David Hockney in May. Then we made a lot of philosophy in June with the talk, What the Heck is Time? In July, we talk about the social impacts of artificial intelligence, and today we will be touching the topic of the Maya. Next month, we come with Pablo Picasso. The conference is 99% full, so if anybody wants to come, please sign up quickly. But most probably, I will open a second date for Picasso because it's almost full. And we will close the year with Don Quixote. That will be on the 4th of December. So this is the program for the year. Program for next year is not yet ready, but we're working on that. And of course, especially because we face the challenge of finding a new place to organize these talks. But I hope that next time I bring you the program for the year. So let me tell, especially for the new joiners, that the presentation is not an academic presentation. That means it does not have the academic rigor that, for example, a university talk could have. It might contain mistakes. It might contain a couple of things that are not super exact. because the purpose here is not accuracy or perfection. The purpose here is to try and transmit you our passion for knowledge. In this case, our passion for knowledge, so other times passion for art, passion for philosophy, and in this case, of course, the passion for the Maya. So that's the goal. And as I anticipated in the beginning, the talk is an interactive one, so this is not just about me talking, and you getting bored there. So every time that you see this red circle with a question mark, that means I'm going to throw a question to you, and we have some prizes to win for those of you who answer correctly. The challenge is to beat Carmen. Carmen is the #1 winner in these questions. Carmen, if you can just say hello. So we're going to try that she does not win. That's a challenge. Okay. Also, let me make a special welcome to my friends Pilar and Chucho, who come all the way from Mexico just for this talk. So please, a big round of applause for them. Thank you very much for being here. So let's get started. I mean, as I always tell you, of course, about the Maya, you could do a PhD. You could talk for hours and hours and hours. I am not going to do that, of course, because we have limited time. I'm going to try to get you out of here in 60 minutes. So I'm going to try to go quickly, but we do have a lot of material. Of course, if you have questions or comments throughout, do not hesitate. Just raise your hand, and of course, we will take them. So let's get started at the Maya. So Mayan wisdom. If you notice, for those of you who were with us last year, the title is very similar to the one we had in October of last year, which was Greek wisdom. And you will see why, because there are some similarities. Anyway, so let's get started with the Maya. So let me start by telling you that the Maya was not like a single group of people, all the same or all homogeneous. It was actually, when we talk about the Maya, we actually refer to more than 28 different ethnic groups, and heterogeneous people in reality, not a one single group homogeneous, but 28 different ethnic groups, all of them, or some of them, with different languages, different customs, different historical trajectories. That means their development had been different from some of those groups than from the others. Now, they do represent one single culture, and that is what we call the Maya culture. So there are many elements that put them in the same basket, and that is why we call them the Maya. Now, what region are we talking about? We're talking about a huge extension of land. So basically, this part, let me start by telling you, this is not Central America. So you should not refer to this area of the world as Central America. The correct word is Middle America, or in Spanish, we say Mesoamerica. And it's a huge area, more than the total surface of France. And that is what makes it so complex, the development of the Maya culture. Now, the area where they lived has an extraordinary geographical variety, and the biosphere is really very, very diverse. They have, for example, subterranean currents, lots of subterranean rivers running and creating these places that, as we will see, are called cenotes. And they have also a very wild vegetation, and the jungle grows and grows like crazy. So as soon as if you have a construction site, for example, and you leave it for a couple of months, when you come back, it's completely covered by the jungle. So you need to think that also in terms of the difficulty of the construction of the Maya cities. It's a place, of course, of incredible beauty, not only because of nature, but also because the Maya ruins combine with that nature and make it very, very nice to visit. What we know about the Mayas, most of them, basically, we know it through, of course, oral tradition, of course, but also by the so-called codices or codex. The codex received the names often of the cities where they ended up at. For example, this is the Madrid Codex, but there's also like a Paris Codex, there's also a Dresden Codex, and so forth, because as the Europeans were discovering the Americas, they would, of course, take the treasures back to Europe. And that is why the codex are named after the city where they are. The area has, of course, a wide variety of fauna, so animals of all sorts, like flamingos, for example, snakes of all kinds, And very special, the jaguar. The jaguar became a mythical animal, also representing a lot of kings, also representing some gods. So this is the fauna. This is the place where we are talking about. And it's also very important that you bear in mind that we're talking about a civilization that existed and flourished through a huge, huge space of time. So basically, from the 18th century before Christ to the 16th century after Christ, that means approximately 3,400 years. So that is the span of development of the Maya. Now, let me tell you something. This is all about the Maya, but where did they come from? So when you think of the Maya, where were they coming from? Well, you probably have heard that the peoples of Mesoamerica, or Middle America, were actually coming from Asia. Was this known to people? No? Okay, well, it's good then that I make this important point in the beginning. So the people who populate the America basically came from Central Asia, and they were going from Central Asia all the way to Siberia and this peninsula, and they passed to Alaska and then down. Let me show you the big road that they had. Well, this was possible because in the last glaciation, so the so-called LGM, the last glacial maximum, which occurred 20,000 years ago, this became solid. So with the glaciation, the land became solid, and the Bering Strait could be crossed by foot, of course, I mean. Now, let me try to walk you, and I want to invite you to imagine for a moment what implications does it have to make this walk. Imagine going from a place like Beijing all the way to the other. I would ask you if you can put your mobile phones in silence, because otherwise I get very distracted. And hold on a sec. Sorry about that. So I would like you to imagine what it implies for people making such a huge trip from, say, for example, Beijing to all the way to Yucatan. Let me walk you step by step. If you wanted to do this trip, for example, you first would need to walk from Beijing to the northeastern Siberia, for example, the peninsula of Chukotka. That's a distance of around 6,000 kilometers, 6,000 kilometers. Then you would need to cross the Bering Strait, which is about 80 kilometers, so from Russia to Alaska. Then you go downwards, crossing all of Alaska, which is very big, onto Canada, and then another 3,000 kilometers. Then from Canada all the way down to Southern California, LA, San Diego, and those cities. Another 2,500 kilometers, and then cross all of Mexico until you get to Yucatan. That means another 3,500 kilometers. So all in all together, your trip would be the beauty of 15,000 kilometers. If you are very sporty and you walk, like for example, the pilgrims of St. Jacob's, of Chemin de Compostelle, Camino de Santiago, we normally walk about 25 kilometers per day on average. So if you were to walk that, it would take you approximately 600 days. It would take you approximately 2 years of continuous walking. But that means, of course, if anybody has, for example, done the Camino de Santiago or any other such pilgrimage, you know that you go, of course, with perfect equipment, a perfect bag, a phone, a GPS, a credit card, and many other things that these guys did not have, of course, right? And you have all these energy bars, and you can always go to the doctor if you need to find it, and if you suddenly don't like it, you just take an airplane back home, and that's it, and you will show all the photographs, and everybody will admire you. Well, this was a little bit different in those days, right? Because, of course, they were not walking like this. First of all, they didn't know where they were going to. I mean, it's not like you open Google Maps and you put Yucatan Peninsula and take me there. Right. No, this is really, I go and I have no idea where I'm going to. This is the importance of this thing. But imagine what it means to displace yourself this distance. Now, the question, of course, is that this was not done in 2 years. This was, of course, not done in 2 years. So, first question for you. How long did it take? Carmen? How many? 40 years. Yes. 200 years. Jean-Jacques, 1,000. 2,000. 3,000. Really, can you give more? Give more. Who said 10,000? Okay, okay. For the gentleman who said 10,000, we have a prize here. Let me actually do the math. So, of course, this is an estimate. Of course, this is an estimate. Don't Google me or ChatGPT me because, of course, this is an estimate. Fundamentally, they could have departed approximately between 24,000 years ago to 16,000 years ago. That means approximately 22,000 years before Christ, they took off, and they arrived around 8,000 to 12,000 years ago, so meaning in the year 10,000 before Christ. That's how long it took. So that means some 8,000 to 12,000 years. So the average is 10,000. That is why you get the little present that we have for you. So a round of applause for the first winner. Thank you. I guess, Carmen, you were letting this pass, right? Just out of courtesy. Yeah. Okay. Now, imagine, let me also invite you to think the following. When time passes, we change, right? When time passes, we change. Now, try to imagine how much people would change in this space of time. For example, try to imagine how much you have changed versus, for example, your grandmother or your grandfather. Think of your grandma. Okay, your grandma has maybe mostly your same genes, mostly your same information and tradition and religion and beliefs, mostly, okay? And yet you are extremely different than your grandmother or your grandfather, right? And that is 3 generations. This space of time is approximately 400 generations. So I want you to imagine what it means to depart from Beijing and walk without knowing where you're going to, with changing weather, changing food, changing environment, different dangers in the way, and 400 generations pass. The people who arrive at the other side have, of course, very, very little to do with the people who departed, and yet they are those same people. So just try to imagine that journey, right? Now, but the Maya, of course, they're of course not the first organized civilization in Middle America. Let me give you a little bit of what happened before the Maya. Before the Maya, we have at least 3 other important civilizations: the Olmecs, the Zapotecs, and the culture of Teotihuacan. Let me start with the Olmecs. Olmecs is a fascinating culture that flourished around 1500 to 400 before Christ in the state of Tabasco in Mexico. They were really very sophisticated. Look at the years. Look at the years. Well, for those years, they already were building these colossal heads. These sculptures are huge colossal heads. They had writing system. They have calendar system. And they were already practicing the agriculture. So they were, of course, sedentary. They were practicing the agriculture. The Olmecs they were a very refined civilization with also advances in basic astronomy and basic mathematics. This is where they live. So that's the Gulf of Mexico. Please don't say Gulf of America. And below that is the area of Tabasco with cities like Tres Zapotes or La Venta, where the Olmecs flourished. Now, I told you that the Olmecs were a very refined civilization. Just as a sample of that, let me show you this beautiful sculpture, which is from around the 900 to 400 before Christ. It's called El Señor de las Limas, the master of the limes. And you can tell by the delicacy of the sculpture how advanced the civilization is, right? So it's just to give you a small sample. But they are officially, formally, the first civilization that flourished in the Americas, the Olmecs. Now, The next one important is the Zapotecs. The Zapotecs, they flourished around 500 before Christ. It's a culture that I absolutely admire. I totally love the Zapotecs. They flourished in the state of Oaxaca, so a little bit southern of the previous civilization, the Olmecs, a little bit south, so the state of Oaxaca. They had also writing system, they have a calendar, and they have a social structure, so already levels in the stratification in the society. And they were, and that is why I admire them so much, they were building fantastic, fabulous cities. Very sophisticated cities, like this one, for example, which is called Monte Albán. It's probably one of my favorite spots on Earth. It's so fascinating when you go and visit this Monte Albán because the temples are aligned with the stars. But some scientists were studying the alignment of the temples, of the buildings, and some discovered that this pyramid back here, which is a little bit like twisted, was not matching with the stars in the sky. And they were very puzzled by that. They say, the Zapotecs, you know, they had almost everything perfect, but that pyramid there doesn't make any sense. Until some astronomers started going deeper into the subject, and they concluded that the pyramid was perfectly oriented to the south star, to the polar star. But the others said, but come on, the polar star cannot be seen from the north hemisphere. And they say, not now, but in those years it was visible, and that is why. So that is why the cities are, all of them, very well oriented. And this, that the Zapotecs discovered or invented, will be passed to the Mayas. The third civilization that we need to mention before talking about the Mayas is the civilization of Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan is outside what is today Mexico City. It was a huge civilization that flourished around 100 BC to 550 after Christ. They are famous for the big pyramids of the sun and of the moon, are beautiful, and they had what is called also the Avenue of the Dead. There's a huge called Avenue of the Dead, and at the end you have the Pyramid of the Moon. And as you walk through the Avenue of the Dead, there's a mountain behind the pyramid. The mountain seems to be disappearing, and the pyramid starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger. This is the people of Teotihuacan. They basically created the biggest, what it was in those times, the biggest city of the Americas. And they disappeared. We do not know why. But anyway, they were a big influence for the Maya. Now, with all this introduction, we can go to the Maya. Now, there are two things that I did not mention, or actually, sorry, one thing that I did not mention, and that is I did not mention the Incas. I did not mention Machu Picchu, because that has absolutely nothing to do with the Maya. So the Incas is a culture that is super far away from the Maya. So that's why I did not mention, just in case you were wondering. Okay, so talking about the Maya, let me tell you a couple of things. So they had walked a lot, of course, but then when did they finally settle? When did they finally settle? Well, they settled around the year between the 7,000 and 2,000. They basically domesticated maize. So let's say, implemented agriculture, but specifically they domesticated maize, and they started to create not only to depend on the rain, but they started to develop basic irrigation systems, and that is when they finally stopped in Yucatán and started developing the Maya region. Now, what region are we talking about? Let me also tell you why, and this is why we don't call it Central America, but Middle America, because we include 5 states of Mexico, so Chiapas, Tabasco, Campeche, Yucatán, and Quintana Roo, 5 states of Mexico, which geographically is North America, and 4 countries of Central America. So we have Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, and Honduras. That's the area that we're talking about. Now, it is important to look at also the geography of the area, because it is very flat in the north, and it has mountains in the south. So these are called the highlands and the lowlands. So they first arrive into the highlands, and then they will migrate towards the north. And we will touch again on this when we talk about Maya literature. So keep this in mind. Now, the Mayan history is divided into 3 periods, as you can imagine: pre-classic, classic, and post-classic. So the pre-classic goes from 2000 before Christ to 250 after Christ, and is really a very impressive development for those years. They started with the creation of a city called Izapa, and their agriculture exploded. As I said before, irrigation, they had basic irrigation. We're talking about the year 1500 before Christ. And then there are three cities that flourish in this period, basically Nakbe, El Mirador, and Aguada Phoenix. Now, those of approximately my age, when we studied in school the Mayas, we never studied Aguada Phoenix. That's a new discovery. I'll be touching on that one in a moment. But we do have, for example, Nakbe, which is in Guatemalan land. Pre-classic period flourished around 1400 before Christ. And we had also El Mirador, pre-classic period. This is in Guatemala. I especially brought you this photograph because I wanted to show you the tremendous jungle that literally devours everything. So, you know, you try to think of the complexity of building these cities in that place where, you know, as soon as you don't take care of the place, everything grows around you. So, but the most important one is Aguada Phoenix. This is a fascinating discovery. That is a recent discovery. As I said before, we did not study in school in my years, but today is the big thing. This city, this is all that we have of that city, so basically like just the foundations. It flourished around between 1400 to 800 before Christ. It is in the state of Tabasco, so just next door to the Olmecs. But what is amazing is that they created this platform that is attracting the attention of all archaeologists worldwide. It's a huge platform, 1.5 kilometers by half kilometer, and with millions and millions, or actually millions of tons of material being put there, and we do not know why, because it's not a city, it's just like a huge platform. So the archaeologists are very, very puzzled to try to figure out what that was. The chief archaeologist is this Japanese professor, Professor Takeshi Inomata from the University of Arizona. They are conducting studies literally as we speak, and it's going to be very exciting to discover what comes next. Now, the Maya were never one single empire, and this is important to bear in mind. So, although they were occupying a big space of big space of land, they were never an empire. And this is important because I want to make an analogy that I think is very relevant in many aspects. So, think of Europe, and we had Rome and we had Greece. And in Mesoamerica, we have the Aztecs and the Maya. So first analogy is that the Rome was an empire, Greece was not. The Aztecs were an empire, the Maya were not. Also, Rome was very much for the war, and Greece was for culture, discoveries, philosophy, and so forth. And similar here, the Aztecs were for conquesting land, for power, for war, and the Maya were for wisdom, were for mathematics, for poetry, for astronomy. So there's a very important similarity. And again, they were never an empire. Now, although they were never an empire, there were, of course, fights, battles between the different kingdoms, like, for example, the kingdom of Mutul, from Tikal with the kingdom of Canul in South Quintana Roo. Those fights, of course, occurred, they happened, but essentially they remained independent cities, independent city-states. The golden age of the city-states, they had monumental architecture, and as I said already, writing and mathematics and astronomy. Some examples of this period. So we start with Palenque, which of course is World Heritage of UNESCO. They flourished around the 7th century before Christ. And Palenque is a very elegant city with a very elegant structure and architecture, as you can tell. The pyramids in Mesoamerica are characterized by these big steps. So it's not like the Egyptians, which are like flat, most of them, but they have like big steps here, and then the staircase goes here in the front normally, with many more steps for people to climb up and down. And at the top, they put a temple. So this is very different than the Egyptian pyramids, because of course these are not tombs, although some of them might have people buried there, but essentially they are temples, or even some of them are used like government offices or even housing. But you have here on the top you have that kind of constructions. Tikal is another example of this one. This is in Guatemala, and they flourish around between the 4th and the 9th century after Christ. And this is the famous temple number 4 of Tikal. You probably recognize it because it appears in one of the Star Wars movies. Maybe some of you recognize it. So this is the time of splendor and development and grandeur in the Maya. Let me show you also the city of Copan. This is a beautiful city with a very nice ball game. We will talk about the ball game in a moment. They flourished between the 5th and the 9th century after Christ. Also UNESCO heritage. Yaxchilan, in the border with Guatemala, so between Mexico and Guatemala, they flourished between the 4th and the 9th. And this is also a very interesting archaeological site where they uncover, as you can see, vegetation is huge again. The jungle is very dense. So they uncover, register what they find, and they need to cover it again because otherwise it gets ruined. Bonampak, also take a look at this one. This is from the 3rd to the 9th century. Take a look at all the stairs, no? Because also socially it implied different levels of the society, and people could have access to different parts of the pyramid. Was not like very democratic. They had the difference, of course, in the hierarchy of people. Calakmul in Campeche, and another one that I wanted to show you because of the vegetation, you know, immediately gets devoured by plants, by trees. Look at this. They basically, some of them have been discovered basically by chance because they are all covered by vegetation. Now, and then after the splendor of this first period, then the cities started to decay. Around the year 900 after Christ, some major cities started to decay and are abandoned. For example, the city of Cumarcay. City of Cumarcay, which was the capital of the Maya Quiché region. The Maya Quiché region is the Guatemala part. It was a very flourishing city, and this is all that remains of that city. It was basically abandoned. But take a look at the years. So it was built in 1400, and then it was abandoned 124 years later, totally abandoned. And we do not know why, but this is Cumarcay today. Now, question for you. What are the possible reasons for decay? Agricultural needs. That was a super quick one. Very well. So prize for agricultural. Bravo. Yes, precisely. Everything started with an agricultural crisis that led to the rupture in ecological equilibrium. So the environmentalists will be very happy to show this example. That leads to famine, which leads to political conflicts, which leads to the decay of the cities. And then the phenomenon has been very, very widely studied, but nobody has concluded with absolute certainty what the cause of the decay was. In any case, then comes the post-classic period, which goes from 900 to 1524 of our time. And basically here, the move towards the north. So remember that I showed you this map before, where the highlands were here and then we moved here. This is the moment, around this year, that these cities collapse and everybody starts going north to the lowlands. Now, then we have cities emerging like Uxmal, which flourished around the year 1000 after Christ, or, of course, Chichen Itza, probably the most famous one, which flourished between the 9th and the 12th century after Christ. You can see how beautiful the architecture is. So here it gets really very refined. So here you have already 2,000 years of history behind you, and then the architecture gets very, very nice. See, all the steps, the big steps of the pyramid are decorated with these patterns, and you have not only one set of stairs, but you have actually 4 sets of stairs. And they have the temple at the top, and they have gods, and then we will talk about the astronomy of this, which is very impressive. And then the Spaniards arrive. So the Spaniards arrive. The first expedition was Juan de Grijalva's expedition, happening in 1518. He was coming from Cuba. Of course, bear with me, the scale is not right. Of course, this is not so close as it looks in this map. But anyway, just to show you that Juan de Grijalva was the first to touch base in the Yucatan Peninsula, and then he started the colonization of the Yucatan area. The Spanish conquest happened here in these years, and it was Pedro de Alvarado who in 1524 finally defeated the Maya, who offered some resistance, but not such a huge resistance. But in any case, they were defeated in the Battle of Utlatan in 1524. And then these two gentlemen, father and son, Francisco Montejo father and Francisco Montejo Jr., they received the instruction from Emperor Charles V to colonize Yucatan and to bring the Catholic religion to Yucatan, and that's why they did. And eventually they founded the city of Mérida, and that was the official moment when Yucatan was colonized by the Spaniards. Now, before the decay, let me talk a little bit about before the decay, how they were organized. So, as I said before, they were never one single empire, but they were independent city-states, and they were run by a figure called Cuhul Ayau. The Cuhul Ayau is basically like the supreme governor, and he was a mixture between king, but with some religious part, like a bit of a shaman, but with a lot of power, and he was ruling the city-state. Now, they had a complex social organization. They had different levels, of course, like kings, the nobles, the priests, the artisans, and the farmers. And of course, there was very little, if not none at all, upward mobility, as you can imagine. They were polytheists, of course. They had many gods. But the important thing here to mention is not just like any other civilization that were polytheists and had many gods and period. No, for the Maya, the gods were actively participating in our lives. They were actively coming into our life frequently, interacting with our lives, manipulating us, guiding us, helping us, and all continuously being close to us. What gods do we have? Well, the main god is Kukulkan. This is the main god. It's like the equivalent of Zeus, for example, or Jupiter. And Kukulkan in the area of, in the rest of Mesoamerica is called Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl means snake with feathers. Now, the question here for you is, who was Quetzalcoatl? Does anybody know who Quetzalcoatl was? Well, it's the god of the Aztecs, yes, and also the god of the Maya, only with the name Kukulkan. But who was this person? Let me give you some hints. Why do you think they call him? So they call him Quetzalcoatl, which means snake with feathers. Why do you think? What do you think a god can have feathers? No, not exactly. Let me give you more hints. So, let me give you more hints. Quetzalcoatl is always represented also in the figure of a man with abundant blonde hair and with blue eyes. A foreigner. What kind of foreigner? Who said a Viking? Yes, you got a prize. Exactly right. You got a big prize. Bravo. You know, normally when we take a plane and the plane gets deviated, for example, because of a snowstorm or something, and we land up in a different airport, we don't like it, right? So when we're trying to get to the destination and then all of a sudden the airplane ends up in a different airport because there was rain or snow or anything, we normally don't like it. Well, there was this Viking, apparently there was a Viking, probably, from today's Denmark or Sweden or Norway or whatever, and he most probably got lost somewhere in the ocean, and he then landed in Mexico. But, contrary to what we don't like if we miss our plane, he basically became a god in Mexico. And he was very admired by the Aztecs and the Maya as well. And he was called the feathered snake because he had blonde hair. He was big and tall and white and with bright blue eyes. That's Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl, that for the Maya is called Kukulkan. Now, you will find the figure of Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan all over the place in Yucatan. And for example, in this pyramid, the one from Chichen Itza, is very interesting because in the spring, precisely on the 21st of March at noon, the sun will go literally like cascading down the steps, and when it comes at noon, we'll reach exactly the corner where there's a statue of Quetzalcoatl, and there will be illuminated precisely in spring. So that's how much they knew about astronomy. That's how well they could build their cities based on that. Now, the Maya believed that the underworld, which they call the Xibalbá, and the paradise, which they call the Tamuachan, they were connected through the tree of life. So basically, our life on Earth was our way to connect it. And they also believed that life was cyclical, so you needed to go through life and then end up in Xibalbá, but cyclical not in the Indian fashion that you go and turn and turn and turn until you get to the nirvana. Here, simply cyclical in that it starts at some point and it ends at a different point, but not violently, but like a cycle, like going back to nature, in that sense, cyclical. Now, just two quick points about their economy. I told you that they discovered agriculture, and that's what made them to stay in Yucatan. Well, 2 points about the economy. First of all, they did not use coins. They used cacao beans as their currency, so they would pay with cacao beans. And they had a so-called milpa system for agriculture. So basically, they divided the parcels of land to cultivate their crops. And every other year, they were burning the crop in the belief that that will become more fertile. Of course, now we know that that is not positive for the crops long term, but in those years, they thought it was, and that was called the milpa system. Up until now, people talk about the milpa when they refer to as the place where they cultivate their crops. They, as I said already several times, they made a series of technological discoveries, very important. They were very advanced in many areas. For example, in mathematics. In mathematics, they made a lot of advancements, and they discovered many things. For example, their numerical system was a base 20 system, where they started counting with a zero. So basically, they discovered zero. More in advance than many civilizations in Europe. They were already using the zero, and it went up until 20, and then it started again. So you could count, and at some point it can be, between 6 and 7. You can be there, but you can count with this system, and the zero is included. Now, the zero that they discovered is not exactly like our zero in the full sense of the word, because, for example, they could use it to express bigger quantities, like 30, 300, 3,000, or 30,000. But they did not arrive to the point where you can make an equation and make it equal to 0 and then solve for x. So this is a passage that the Arabs did, but not the Maya. So they stayed on this side. When you use the 0 more sophisticatedly, then you can make equations and make them equal to 0 and then solve for a variable. Anyway, they had, however, very important astronomical discoveries. This is the observatory at Chichen Itza. So they were really very worried and interested in what was happening in the sky. They had, they made calculations with a huge precision. They had not only one calendar, but they had 3 calendars. The first one is called Haab, the Haab calendar, that includes exactly 365 days. And they used to say that they were divided in 18 months of 20 days. It was the official religious and agricultural calendar. And they said that it was 360 days plus 5 terrible days. In those 5 terrible days, you should stay home, go nowhere, don't do anything, don't invest your money, don't do nothing. That was the Hab calendar. Then also had the Tzolkin calendar, which had 260 days, was the ritual calendar, like for sacrifices and things like that. And then they also had the Tun calendar with 360 days, which was the so-called long count, which was excluding the 5 days. So, you know, we at home have this environmental calendar with, you know, the black trash, the plastic, the Valor Lux. Yeah, sometimes it's a bit like that. Anyway, they were also they were really very good astronomers. Folks. They were able to track the course of the planets. Bear in mind that in Europe, up until Kepler arrived, we thought that the planets were rotating in circles, up until Kepler. And the Maya were already discovering this much, much earlier, and they knew that the orbits were elliptical. This is way, way far away from the development in Europe. And they were discovering also, they were being able to make predictions of solar and lunar eclipses. Now, let me stop here to ask you something very important, especially for those of you who were with us last year for Greek wisdom. Question for you. So I tell you that predicting eclipses is very, very important. But why is that so important? Why the fact that a population can predict an eclipse is so important? We have a big prize for anybody who can guess that. Or just remember it from Greek wisdom when we talk about Thales of Mileto. Why is it important if I can predict an eclipse?
Because nature follows rules.
Jean-Jacques was very quick. Exactly. Well, let me tell you. If you can predict an eclipse, that means that nature follows rules. That means what else? That the stars are not just at the caprice of the gods. They are not just randomly moving. But let's take what Jean-Jacques said and let's make the second derivative of that. What is, if nature follows rules? What is the second step? If nature follows rules, you can forecast, yeah, but what else? People must follow rules. Exactly right. Exactly right. So you have the astronomic justification why you should behave, why you should follow the rules, because the stars, even the sun, even the moon are following rules, so therefore you should follow them as well. Now, the writing was hieroglyphical writing, and they basically expressed that in let's say two places, the codices, and the stela. The stela, I'll show you in a moment. So the codex I told you already about, the Paris Codex, the Dresden Codex, the Madrid Codex, and so forth. The stela are these huge like pieces of stone where they carved and they wrote, for example, this is the Quiriguá stela that represented Kaktiwil Chan Yopat, who is one of the kings, and all the writing goes there, the story of them, when he was born, from where he was, and so forth. This one is the Tomina stela, same thing, for King Balam Yaksun. This is another one for Governor Itzmani Balam. By the way, start recognizing the word Balam, which means master of a land. These are the kind of sculpture that they have. As you can see, it's very refined, the sculpturing, and here is the writing. Here is the hieroglyphical writing all over the place. Now, I told you already a little bit about alignment of the pyramids that came originally from the Zapotecs, the step pyramids and so forth, the palaces with very sophisticated facades like this one here, and the observatories. I showed you this already. Let me just show you a little bit more of the astronomical alignment of the temples. Basically, they would build the big pyramid of a city was going to be here, and then in front they had three of them. One would be oriented to the east, so the sun comes up here, and then they had exactly on this way, so to the north is when the sun comes out on the 21st of June, and here when the sun comes out on the 21st of December. So it was precisely a triangle with the needed alignment distribution. Now, I also told you that they had ball courts, so they had the ball game, and they were very, very fans of the ball game. And the ball game in general in Mesoamerica, we call it juego de pelota, but specifically in Yucatán, in the Maya culture, it's called poc-tapoc. Poc-tapoc is played with a very hard ball of gum, like a gummy ball, but very, very hard, and you need to pass the ball through this ring. Now, this is one of the fields of poc-tapoc, the one that I like the most, the one in Copan. Now, or this is another one, you can tell. It's like a long rectangle, but more like an I, you know, like a letter I with these places here as well. And this is poc-tapoc. Now, let me ask you, does anybody know the rules of poc-tapoc? Nadine? Don't touch it with the hands. So you touch it with what? Exactly. So is precisely with the elbows, with the hips, or with the shoulders. And imagine only with the hip, with the elbow and shoulders, you need to bring a heavy, heavy ball through a ring. That by the way, the ring is not like in basketball horizontally, but it's vertical. So maybe even more difficult. I don't know. I've never played. This is the way it looks like. So you need to pass it just using elbows, hips, knees, and shoulders. Anyway, let me now tell you a bit on, I mean, folks, I'm just running through the slides, of course, because we have no time. But of course, every topic would require much more explanation. But just to give you some ideas, religion and the Mayan pantheon. So what I told that they had many gods, and they were very much involved in the life of people. The first one, it's Samna. Samna is the supreme creator. He governs the sky, is the god of wisdom and the god of writing. Then we have Chak, who is the rain god. For the Aztecs, he's going to be called Tlaloc. We have Ixchel, not surprisingly, a goddess, so the goddess of the moon, fertility, medicine, and childbirth. You can see the similitudes with European cultures or Asian cultures, right? Having similar gods. Kinich Ayao, the sun god, the divine ruler. And they had a lot of rituals. Like, for example, they had offerings, they practiced bloodletting, and of course, human sacrifice. Now, let's talk a bit about human sacrifice, because human sacrifice for the Maya is very different than for the Aztecs. Does anybody know the difference of the human sacrifice in the Maya culture versus the Aztec culture? Well, this is a tough one, so let me tell you. The Aztecs basically were sacrificing humans to keep their gods satisfied and happy, so that chaos would not prevail. For example, they would kill one princess every night to guarantee that the sun comes up the next day. Right. So imagine the frustration and the anxiety that they had. So they've been doing this for years and years and years. And when the Spaniards arrived and they forbid the human sacrifice, imagine the anxiety of the people the night before. Now imagine the deception they have the following morning when they say the sun does come out and we have sacrificed thousands and thousands of human beings, right? The Aztecs were also sacrificing people, for example, when they conquered another city. So they took some prisoners and it was like a tax, and they would kill them. They would sacrifice them like that. But the Maya were sacrificing for very different reasons. The Maya were sacrificing, and also they were sacrificing in more reduced numbers, so not as many as the Aztecs. But they were also sacrificing, but basically because they consider they need to give back to their gods. Because the gods gives us everything that we have, and it's just a way like to give thanks to them, to sacrifice a couple of guys every day, just to give back to the earth, right? Today we use photovoltaic and energy and things like that to give back to the earth. In those days, they just killed a couple of people. Anyway, that's the sacrifices. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about Mayan literature, which I think is very nice and interesting, and their sacred texts. I'm going to touch on two of their books. I start with the second most important one, which is the Chilám Balám. The Chilám Balám contains historical and religious traditions to secure legacy. What they wanted is that their culture would not be lost with the arrival of the Spanish. They wanted to preserve their culture, and that is why they wrote the Chilám Balám. Chilám Balám is actually a collection of different books. So we have different Chilám Baláms being compiled. They were actually written pretty late, so it's 17th and 18th century of our time, of course, so after Christ, of course. So because they have the anxiety that the Spaniards are there and are imposing their thoughts. So they wrote the story of the prophet Jaguar, and they are written, funny enough, they are not written in hieroglyphicals, they are written in Latin characters, but in Maya from Yucatán. So Yucatán Maya in Latin characters. And they tell historical importance and religious traditions. They have, I told you there were several books, so they have, for example, the Chilám Balám, the Chumayel, Chilám Balám de Cahuá, Chilám Balám de Exil. So these are different places in the Maya civilization. All of them are Chilám Baláms, and they put together the tradition, and they become like the sort of like the Maya culture for dummies, basically. And then they had, of course, medical treatments and ceremonies also included there, and it was basically to try to connect the past and the present. So that's the Chilám Balám. But let me now go a little bit back in time, more back in time, and tell you about my favorite book of the Maya, which is called the Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh tells the story of, so tells basically the creation myth, so the creation of the universe, and tells the story of the hero twins and the underworld, the Xibalbá. For the Maya, the twins were very interesting people, very like magical people. So they're always going to include twin heroes in their stories. But the Popol Vuh is fascinating because it's going to talk about their mythology and their traditions of the Maya, but it is not the world of God. So it is wrong if you hear some people say, yeah, it's like the Maya Bible. No, it's not the Maya Bible in the sense that it does not contain the world of God. It's simply the description of how the universe was created. It was written also very late, between 1554 and 1558. And let me tell you the story, because I think it's very nice. I'll say the creation meets beliefs. And now, guess what is at the beginning? Exactly, chaos. Chaos and confusion. The beginning, there is chaos and confusion, just like in the Genesis, and the silent nothingness. The silent nothingness is there. And the voices of the gods floating on the nothingness. So this is purely, as you can tell, Genesis 1, right? The Logos was floating, and the verb was floating in the dark, right? Just like what we have in Christianity. Now, here is the big difference. First step, the gods divide the mountains. They separate the waters from the land, creating the mountains. This is very important difference, because why do they emphasize the mountains? Because remember the map that I show you with the highlands and the lowlands, right? They flourish in the highlands first, and then they move to the lowlands. That is why why the mountains are a very important milestone in the creation of the world. Now, then, all the rest is created. Animals in nature are created. Snakes are created. Jaguars are created. But there's always something missing. What is missing? Humans, right. Maybe 50 years ago we would say men, but now we say human, yeah. Humans were missing, exactly, right. Now, so the gods determined they should create us. But there's a big difference. Why our God, I'm going to assume that everybody here, or majority here, is Christian origin. Why were our God creating Adam, for example? It's very different than why the Maya gods were creating humans. So why were they creating them? First of all, they made several attempts. So this is not like God who created Adam, who goes and snaps right on. Adam is created and Michelangelo, fantastic. No, here no. They needed to do several trial and errors. But the question here is why did the gods want to create humans? What was the purpose of this? Why do you think they wanted to create humans? Say that again? To dominate them. More or less. To have something similar to them. To sacrifice them, okay, getting close, getting close. They basically wanted someone to glorify them. They wanted someone to worship them. If I'm a god and nobody glorifies me, nobody tells me how cool I am, nobody worships me, then it's useless. Exactly. So humans are not created out of love or because God is love and love. No. They are created just because I want them to glorify me. I want them to worship me. Now, we're going to make the first attempt. So there come the gods. They get together. So several gods, not only one god, they get together. And they made the first group of people, and they made them out of clay. And they launched them to the world. And guess what? A flood comes. And then they get destroyed. Any connection with Noah and the ark? Right? Okay, so they get destroyed in the first try. So second attempt. Okay, they create them out of wood. And what happens? No. This is the Maya. It's a bit more romantic. They are made out of wood. So guess what? They have no feelings. They don't feel. They are made of wood. They don't have a heart. So, even if they worship me, they don't worship me with a heart. So they are useless. So what's the punishment? No. It's a Charles Darwin style. They are sent to the jungle and they become monkeys. They become monkeys. So they look a little bit like us, but they are not us. So they go. And then we're going to make a third attempt. But you know how it is when in a government they don't agree with something, one party says something, the other party says the opposite, and they fight. And so what do? They start fighting, and the gods fight. And then at some point, one of the gods says, you know what? My name is Vukukakix, and I am the one. I am the biggest, I am the wisest, I am the nicest, and I am going to rule. So before we create humans or not create humans, I am going to dominate. But he's very arrogant. He becomes very arrogant, very powerful. He starts making decisions of all sorts of ridiculous decisions. No? Today you would say tariffs and other stuff, right? So Vukukakik says, I'm going to dominate. But of course, some people don't like that idea. And there's these twins called Hunhunampu and Vukubhunampu who say, no, we're going to fight you. And they start fighting. And the first god who tried to create men, they are the first god who tried to create men with real power. But Vukukakix wins and kills Hunhunampu. So Vukukakix seems to win. But then what happens? Hunhunampu's head is posted on a tree. And then there's different versions of this part of the story. But one of the versions says that the tree had very nice fruits. Any similarity? And that the tree was in the center of the garden. And what happened to the head? The head started attracting a princess called Ixkik. So Ixkik gets closer to the tree, and the head starts talking to her. Say, come closer. But the head is a man. This is for fairness. So the Ixkik gets closer and closer, and then the head at some point spits on her, on the hand, and then she becomes pregnant, of course. She becomes pregnant, and she's going to go back to Earth, and she's going to give birth to, guess what? Twins. And they are called Hunhunampu and Ixbalanque. And Hunhunampu and Ixbalanque are going to be strong and young. They're going to go and kill Vukukakix, and they are going to restore order. So order is restored, and then because they have won, they will divide the pie, and one will become the sun. That's a typo. One will become the sun, and the other one will become the moon. And now it's time to try again. So this is the third time that we try. We're going to create men out of what? Yeah, perfect. Maize, let's say maize. So maize is a variety of corn, but basically the answer is right, correct. Maize. And now, finally, we have success. Men are created out of maize, and they succeed. Now, humans are created, the gods are happy, order is restored, but then the gods see that humans are there on Earth, and they want to give us 3 elements to go through life. 3 elements. What elements are these? Water? No, the water was already there from first. There was fire. No, fire was already there. Wind? No, all the elements were already there, folks, because there were already monkeys. There were, feelings. Oh. Spanish conquerors. Well, let me tell you, the first, and maybe you can. So first gift that they will receive is maize. So to go through life, I give you maize. That's a consolation. Number 2, second prize, I'm going to give you wives. Now, maybe not all the gentlemen are convinced, but basically they are giving wives. And then, please, for a big prize, what's the third element? Think out of the box. Think out of the box. You will hate Mayan gods when I show you the next slide. What did they give to humans? Oh. No. Come on. You can do it. Work, exactly. They created work. So I told you they would not like them. Exactly. So I summarize. So first thing, they give us maize. Second thing, they give us wives. And third thing, they give us work. I mean, they could have stopped at number 2, right? Anyway, so order is restored, and that's enough for the Popol Vuh, but I invite you to read the Popol Vuh. You can find it on the internet in English or French or any language. It's very funny. It's very interesting. Now, before I close, a couple of curiosities and fun facts. They, for some reason, they like cranial deformation, so they like that the head was like very flat from here to the nose. So when the babies were born, they would put here a piece of wood to make their head with the deformation that followed the style. They love dental inlay, so they would put you like little semi-precious stones or precious stone in your teeth so that you could show off, you know. And another myth is the myth of the year 2012. You might have heard a couple of years ago the movie about the Aztec calendar named the Maya calendar, completely wrong anyway. But they were telling that the year 2012 was going to be the destruction. Now, you have heard of that one, huh? Well, it turns out that the tradition, the Maya tradition, does point to the year 2012, but not as a moment of destruction, but as the end of an era, called the Baktun cycle. So not an apocalyptic moment, but a moment that symbolized renewal and transition. That was the idea. That was all. Right. So today, the Maya, they continue to exist, in the same region, so Mesoamerica, and they are close to 7 million people. They have their traditions, but combined with Christianity, predominating maybe Christianity, but also with some of their traditions. And I guess that's enough for cultural information, but maybe you want to organize a trip, so I thought I add you just a couple of slides on a trip if you want to organize a trip to Yucatán Peninsula. First of all, very important, do not go outside the dry season. So do go between November and April. And no, please, this is not because it is summer there. No, it is winter as well. It's northern hemisphere, but it does not rain, so you don't find hurricanes in that area. If you go between April and October, the chances that you end up in the basement of your hotel log for 3 days is very significant, so avoid. Now, I invite you to, of course, visit the Maya site, but not only. There are beautiful cities like Mérida, Campeche, Valladolid, and the cenotes, where you can even do scuba diving in the cenotes. That I have not done it myself, but they say it's very beautiful. And also consider visiting the haciendas. So the haciendas are old monasteries or buildings created by the Spaniards, and today are transformed into some boutique hotels. And some of them are very nice, they tell me. And finally, to open your appetite before the cocktail, let me super quickly drive you through some of the Yucatan cuisine delicacies. First of all, we have the famous cochinita pibil. So that's very, very, very nice. You can try it. This is pork with a very special sauce created of this ingredient called achiote. We also have other kind of peppers, especially the pepper habanero, which is very, very sharp, so very spicy, but very good. Very famous is the soup of lime. This is a classical, and this is delicious, and it's not spicy or not necessarily spicy. It's very, very good. Panuchos are this thing like open tacos, but of maize, of course, created of maize with avocado. And this is another photograph of panuchos, so they are very, very good. Tamales yucatecos, also created out of maize and folded into a banana tree sheet. Stuffed chiles as well, they're also very good, I recommend you. The traditional horchata from Spain has been adapted locally with the Maya ingredients, and it's very fresh as well. Or this drink is called xaventún, which is basically a liquor, an anise liquor, also very good. And of course, you can try it in the markets and, very informally. Well, so you can start packing your bags for next summer. If you feel that the summer has just passed, that's an invitation. And of course, I thank you with this. I hope you like it very much. Thank you.